The wind rolled across the dry land like a tired traveler who no longer remembered where he came from. The sky looked wide and endless, painted in shades of soft fire as the sun dropped behind the far mountains. A lonely mound of earth rested near a thorny bush, and beside it, a young frontier woman sat on her knees. Her dress was dusty, her hands trembled, and her cheeks were marked with dried tears. She whispered no sound, but grief lived heavy in her eyes. She held a small cloth bundle pressed tight against her chest, though it no longer had weight inside. Anyone passing that quiet patch of land would know from a single glance that she had lost more than she could carry. The grave of her infant was fresh, the soil still loose, and a small wooden cross leaned slightly as if the wind could not decide whether to comfort her or pull the memory away. Her voice finally escaped in faint words, almost like a prayer that hoped no one could hear. She spoke to the ground as if it could feel her breath, telling her baby she was sorry. She felt she had failed at the one thing every mother deeply believes she is born for, and it tore her deeper than any wound a knife or bullet could give. She did not look like she belonged in the desert anymore. She looked like someone who had given every last piece of her strength to the earth. The West was full of stories about ranchers, travelers, native families, and wandering cowboys. But what sat in the sand that night was a story shaped by heartbreak. She believed her life had ended with the tiny heartbeat that slipped away inside her arms. The woman did not know how long she had been there. The sun fell lower, the air cooled, and the chirping of crickets started rising in soft waves. She stared at the cross until her eyes blurred and her breath grew shallow. She had come west with dreams of building a home, raising cattle, baking warm bread on a wood stove, and singing lullabies. Instead, she found herself sitting beside a grave in the middle of nowhere. Life on the frontier was harsh, and the land demanded strong spirits, but grief still broke even the toughest hearts. She wrapped her arms around herself, unsure if she would have the strength to rise again. As she wiped her face with dusty fingers, she felt movement in the breeze, like a presence standing far behind her. She stiffened, but did not turn yet. Out here, travelers appeared from nowhere. Some came with kindness, some with danger, and some with their own wounds. She breathed slowly and tried to gather courage. She kept one hand near the ground, feeling for a small stone she could hold if needed. The sound of footsteps grew clearer, slow and steady, nothing frantic, nothing careless. Like someone who lived in the open land and knew how to walk without fear. When she finally gathered her strength to look, she found an Apache warrior at a distance, tall, silent, and watching her with calm, unreadable eyes. He did not hold a weapon ready, nor show any sign of threat. His long dark hair moved with the breeze, and his chest carried beads and markings that held meaning only his people knew. His face showed strength, but his eyes held something softer, like understanding. She stayed still and did not speak, unsure if she could trust anyone after losing everything. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other with the desert wind whispering between them. He came a few steps closer, but stopped so she would not feel cornered. He glanced at the grave, then at her face, and lowered his head slightly in quiet respect. She felt her throat tighten again, not from fear this time, but from the rare feeling of being seen. She expected him to turn away or leave without words. But instead he gently shifted something wrapped in animal skin that he carried close to his chest. She frowned slightly, wondering why he handled it so carefully. His voice when it came was calm and low, like a river that had traveled many miles. He spoke in simple English, though his accent shaped his words differently. He told her that he had found a child near an abandoned wagon some miles away. The child was alive, but hungry and needed warmth, and he could not leave the little one alone in the wild. He said he followed the tracks in hopes of finding someone who could help the baby survive. She stared, unable to speak, thinking her heart might collapse under the weight of hearing the word baby again. The Apache warrior slowly stepped closer, still leaving her space. He opened part of the covering and showed a tiny face sleeping softly, unaware of the harsh world around it. The air seemed to pause, and even the wind felt uncertain. The woman shook her head lightly, unable to understand how fate could place another infant before her so soon after losing her own. She felt fear rising, Not fear of the warrior, but fear of her own heart breaking anew. She whispered that she could not hold another child, that she did not deserve to, that she was not strong enough. She said the land itself could testify how she had failed. The warrior listened without interrupting. He understood grief in ways others could not imagine. His people had buried their own children, their own elders, and had walked land soaked with memories. He told her that he did not bring the baby to replace the one she had lost. No one could do that, and no heart should ever be asked to accept such a trade. He said he brought the baby because life was still sacred. He made it clear she had a choice and did not owe him anything. His voice carried respect, not demand. He stood like someone who had seen storms that would crush ordinary men. Yet he remained gentle for the sake of a child. Tears returned to her eyes, but not the same as before. Something inside her felt pulled between two worlds. One world whispered that she should turn away and protect her heart from more pain. The other told her that life sometimes asked people to rise even when they crawled. She looked at the fresh grave, then at the child, then at the warrior. Her chest felt tight, and her breath came uneven, unsure if this moment was punishment or second chance. She asked him how he found the baby, who the parents were, and whether there was any path to return the child home, even if home no longer existed. The warrior spoke slowly, saying he had followed signs, but found no living adults near the wagon. The baby was the only one breathing among what was left behind, as the desert sky darkened into purple shades. She felt her future swaying like a lantern in the wind. She asked him why he brought the baby to her instead of to someone stronger or somewhere safer. His answer was simple, but she did not fully understand it. He told her the land guides those who listen, and he believed she was not chosen by accident. He added that sometimes the world gives people what they never expected right after taking what they never wanted to lose. That idea shook her deeply. Her hands trembled, unsure if she should reach for the baby or stand and run from destiny itself. The warrior waited quietly, giving her time, showing no sign of impatience. The baby moved slightly and made a soft sound, turning her entire body cold and warm at the same time. Her heart pounded as she wondered if she could dare touch life again. She finally placed one hand on the ground to steady herself, but before she made any decision, the wind shifted and carried a distant sound across the plains. The warrior turned his head toward the mountains, listening as his eyes narrowed just a little. Something or someone might have been approaching, and the fragile peace of that moment hung by a thin thread. She did not know yet that her story was about to change in ways neither she nor the warrior could predict, and the next breath she took would pull her into a path she never planned to walk. The woman's breath grew unsteady as she stared at the warrior, his eyes fixed on the far distance while the soft cry of the baby rose like a tiny echo against the darkening plains. She pushed herself up slowly, almost unsure if her legs would carry her weight. The sand clung to her skirt, and she brushed it away with shaking hands, trying to gather her mind before anything else happened. The warrior held the child close, as if protecting it from the chill that rolled with the night wind. For a moment she wondered if he had spent days alone with the baby, trying to keep it alive with nothing but instinct and heart. The thought struck her deeply because it reminded her how strength could appear in unexpected shapes. She finally asked him what he heard in the distance. He did not answer right away. Instead, he lowered his head slightly, as if reading the voice of the land through his senses. When he turned back to her, his voice came low and steady. He said he was not sure yet if the sound was a rider, an animal, or just the wind hitting the rock walls in the canyons. She felt her chest tighten because, in the West, anyone approaching at night could mean hope or danger. A lone traveler might be harmless, but a hungry wolf or someone with bad intentions could turn the darkness into a trap. She looked at the baby again, and something inside her softened and hurt at the same time. She whispered that they could not stay out in the open forever, especially with the night growing colder by the minute. The warrior agreed and pointed to a distant cluster of cottonwood trees near a narrow, dry stream bed. He said they could shelter there for now. She hesitated, glancing back at her baby's grave, not ready to leave, but knowing she could not remain there through the night. Her voice cracked when she told the tiny grave that she would return at sunrise, and that she was not walking away forever. She reached out and laid her palm softly on the soil, feeling for the last time the bond she was afraid of losing. The warrior stepped back, letting her have her moment without pressure. When she finally rose, she wiped her face and nodded without speaking. Together, they started walking across the silent desert floor, the sky slowly filling with stars that looked like scattered grains of salt across black velvet. Each step felt heavier than the last. She did not even know the warrior's name, nor his village, nor where he intended to go once they found shelter. He walked with a quiet strength, keeping a steady pace, making sure she did not fall behind. He checked the baby often, adjusting the wrap to keep out the cold. She finally found the courage to ask him more about how he found the child. He explained that he had been traveling through abandoned old trails after hunting for food near the rocky hills. That was when he found the broken wagon and signs of a struggle. Some belongings were scattered. A torn blanket still hung on a wheel, and tracks showed that something or someone had caused panic. He heard a faint cry and searched until he found the child tucked between two sacks, weak but alive. He told her that there were no other breathing souls nearby, and he knew he could not leave the baby behind because the wild always claimed the unprotected. As she listened, she wondered if life had been trying to speak to her, and she just could not understand it yet. She shared a part of her own story, too, explaining how she and her husband came west to start a new life. They had worked hard to build a cabin of wood and stone, dreaming of cattle, crops, and family. But life on the frontier did not always grant the dreams people carried. When sickness came, she had no doctor, no medicine, and watched her child weaken day by day while she prayed the sky would hear her. The warrior remained silent as she spoke, not judging her, not offering false comfort. They reached the trees after a long walk, and he helped her gather some dry weeds and branches. He made a small fire that burned low, careful not to send large sparks into the wind. They sat across from each other with the flames warming their faces. She kept looking at the baby, drawn by something she did not understand. The little one slept without fear, unaware of how many lives had suddenly become tied together because of a single twist of fate. She asked the warrior if he belonged to a nearby camp. He nodded, saying his people lived beyond the hills where the land opened into a valley rich with grass and hidden springs. But he warned her that not everyone in his camp would welcome a stranger from the outside world. Some had witnessed too much loss from settlers, while others still believed that two worlds could never live side by side without hurt. She understood because she had heard those same whispers among frontier towns about native families. She wished for a world where people judged by kindness rather than blood or heritage. But the West was not made of soft rules. She leaned closer to the fire and spoke quietly, saying she did not want trouble for anyone. The warrior answered with calm certainty, saying trouble had already begun before they ever met. He said the child would attract questions and possibly danger, because whoever attacked the wagon might still be out there. His words chilled her deeper than the wind. She asked if he believed it was raiders, outlaws, or someone desperate for supplies. He said he could not be sure, but the broken wheel, missing items, and footprints told him there had been panic, not accident. For a moment, she wondered if danger might come looking for the baby. She felt a strange pull in her heart, like she wanted to protect a child who was not her own, yet she feared she was too weak already. She finally asked why he trusted her, a stranger, with something so precious. He answered that sometimes a person's eyes tell more than words. He said he saw grief, but also fire inside her, something that did not give up, even when life tried to bury it. She looked away, embarrassed, because she felt anything except strong. The baby stirred and gave a soft cry, and he carefully handed the little one to her. She reacted with shock first, unsure if she was ready to hold a living child again. Her hands trembled, but she did not pull away. She held the baby close and felt its tiny warmth press into her chest. Tears came again, but not with the same painful weight. Two worlds touched in that moment, past sorrow and new possibility. She did not speak because her voice would not come out. The warrior watched her gently, knowing she needed time, as the fire crackled and the shadows grew thicker. She asked whether there was a chance that the child's family might still be alive somewhere. He told her that he did not know, but they would search when daylight returned. She agreed that no decision would be made until they tried to find answers. But a small voice inside her whispered fear that if the family did return, they might accuse her or take the child back before she healed her heart. The warrior finally rested against a tree, but stayed alert. His senses sharp, even in quiet moments. She kept holding the baby until it fell asleep again, and then she laid it gently on a folded cloth beside her. She pulled her shoulders tight and stared into the fire as if it could show her tomorrow. She whispered that she feared the world was not done hurting her yet. The warrior looked at her with steady eyes and told her that sometimes the land tested people before showing mercy. She wanted to believe him, but the night did not offer comfort. Instead, it offered silence, and in silence. Every worry became louder. Just when she felt her eyes growing heavy, the same distant sound returned. Clearer this time, more rhythmic than before. The warrior straightened and placed a hand near his belt where he carried a small handmade blade. She held her breath and pulled the child closer again. The wind paused like it too was listening. Something or someone was out there. Moving through the dark, getting closer, the warrior lifted his head slightly. His eyes fixed on the dark stretch of land beyond the cottonwoods. The fire flickered against his face, showing the sharp lines of someone who had lived more nights under the open sky than inside walls. The woman held the baby close, her heart beating so fast she could almost hear it in her ears. She tried to steady her breath, listening for any shape or rhythm in the sound. But her fear made everything blur into the same heavy thump of her pulse. She looked to the warrior, waiting for him to speak, to give some sign whether she should run, or hide, or stay still. But he stayed silent, breathing slow. Watching the land like an animal trained by nature itself, a low shuffle came again, closer this time. It was too steady to be the wind and too careful to be a wild animal crashing through brush. The warrior gave her a small motion with his hand, telling her to stay behind him. She crouched near the tree roots, keeping the child wrapped tight, her fingers gripping the cloth so strongly her knuckles grew white. She prayed the sound belonged to nothing dangerous, but the land seldom listened to small prayers at night. The West carried its own rules, and she knew danger often moved without warning, just like grief had struck her days before. The sound finally broke into clear footsteps, slow but purposeful. The warrior called out in a calm voice, asking who was there. No answer came. The footsteps stopped. The fire crackled louder as if the silence pulled the warmth closer. The woman felt her throat tighten, thinking of all the stories she had heard about raiders, drifters, and men who moved through the night searching for anything to claim. The warrior stood tall, showing no fear, but ready for whatever would emerge from the shadows. After a tense breath, a figure stepped halfway into the light. It was an older man wearing a torn coat and leaning heavily on a stick. His beard was thick and wild, his face sunburnt, and his eyes hollowed from long travel. He raised his free hand slowly, as if afraid sudden movements might cost him his life. He said he meant no harm, and was only searching for water and shelter. His voice cracked with dryness, and she could tell he had been wandering for some time. The warrior asked him to keep his distance. The man nodded and stood where he was, showing he had no intention of pushing closer. She stared at him, unsure whether to trust his words. Something about him looked broken, but broken did not always mean safe. The warrior asked where he came from. The man gave a choked answer about losing his horse, losing his supplies, and almost losing himself in the desert. He said he had been walking for days and feared the night would finish what the sun had started. He lifted his coat slightly to show he carried no gun. The warrior's eyes narrowed. Not in anger, but in the quiet caution of someone who knew danger often wore simple clothing. The woman looked at the baby in her arms and wondered if this stranger had anything to do with the abandoned wagon the warrior mentioned earlier. But she kept those thoughts to herself for now, letting the warrior take the lead. After a long moment, warrior allowed the man to approach the fire, but only by a few steps. Sand warned him not to make sudden moves. The stranger obeyed gladly, turning his hands to the heat as though he had not felt warmth in days. As the fire glowed against their faces, the woman began to notice details she had not seen before. The stranger's coat was torn near the shoulder, and there was dried blood that looked days old. His boots were worn so badly that one sole flapped loose. His exhaustion was real, but she could not shake the feeling that something else lived behind his eyes. Something he was not ready to tell. The warrior asked him more questions: where he had traveled from, whether he had seen any wagons, whether he passed anyone else on the trails. The man hesitated at the question about the wagon. She saw it clearly. A flicker of recognition flashed across his face before he quickly masked it. He said no, he had not seen a wagon, but his voice held a strange silence afterward, like someone choosing his words rather than telling the truth. The warrior noticed it too. She could tell by the slight change in his posture. The night grew colder, and the baby whimpered softly. The man looked at the child, surprise lighting his tired eyes, and he asked gently if the little one was theirs. She shook her head. The warrior said only that the child was found alone. The stranger nodded but kept his gaze on the baby, studying every detail as though searching for recognition. She wondered if he knew something, but she did not dare ask. Her heart warned her to be careful. Hours passed slowly. The stranger fell into a half-sleep near the fire, too tired to hide his weakness. The warrior did not rest. He remained awake, listening to every sound, watching the man with quiet suspicion. She wanted to ask if he thought the stranger was connected to the wagon attack, but she knew the night air carried every word farther than intended. Instead, she waited until the man's breathing grew heavy and even, a sign he had drifted into deep sleep. When the warrior finally moved close enough for her to speak softly, she whispered that the man reacted strangely when the wagon was mentioned. The warrior nodded once. He said the same thought crossed his mind. He added that the man's tracks did not match the wagon trail from earlier, but his injuries might have come from something worse than the desert. He said danger sometimes came in groups, not alone, and that they needed to stay alert. She tightened her arms around the child, feeling a mix of dread and guilt for bringing the baby into this. The warrior then examined the prints around the firelight, noticing deeper impressions that did not belong to any of them. He pointed out that the man's shoes were not the only set in the area, meaning someone else had walked close earlier. It frightened her that someone could have watched them without speaking, without stepping into the light. She wondered if those hidden prints belonged to whoever attacked the wagon. Maybe they followed the baby's trail, or maybe they followed the man. Waiting for the right moment, her thoughts tangled with fear as she realized they were not the only ones moving through the desert tonight. The warrior whispered that they would leave before sunrise and put distance between themselves and this place. She asked what would happen to the stranger if they left him behind. The warrior said it would depend on whether the man woke harmless or showed his true intent. The woman felt torn because compassion pulled her one way and survival pulled her the other. The West often forced people into choices without comfort. When the fire grew low, she sat with the baby asleep against her chest. She studied the stranger beside the flames, his rough hands, his scarred face, and the way he muttered in his sleep. His words were unclear, but they sounded like names and short cries for someone who never answered. She wondered if he too carried ghosts from his past. Pain in the West was common, but the kind he carried felt heavier, something he could not set down even if he tried. Down the stream bed, the wind shifted again. The warrior stood suddenly, head turned toward the hollow between the rocks. This time, he was sure something moved. She followed his gaze, but saw nothing except darkness. Still, the land rustled differently, as if footsteps blended with the sand. The warrior's hand hovered near his blade, but he did not draw it yet. The baby stirred, sensing tension in the air. She held it close, her heartbeat racing again. A faint glimmer appeared near the bush, the reflection of something metallic. It vanished quickly, but not before the warrior saw it. He whispered that they were not alone, and that whoever was out there was watching them closely. She felt her stomach twist, fearing what sunrise might bring. The stranger suddenly jolted awake, looking around in panic as if someone had touched him. He asked what happened, and the warrior told him to stay silent. The stranger obeyed, but the look on his face showed he too heard something in the darkness. The night held its breath again. Something waited out there, and none of them knew if it was coming toward them or circling for the right moment to strike. The warrior stood ready, the woman held the baby tight, and the stranger trembled, like a man haunted by his own past. And the darkness kept moving. The woman struggled to steady her breath while holding the baby close to her chest. Trying not to shake even though fear moved inside her like cold water, the warrior stepped a little forward, not leaving her side but protecting the small space they had. The stranger wiped sweat from his forehead, though the air was cold, his eyes fixed on the bushes where the metallic reflection had appeared. The fire slowly burned down, sending soft, red glow across the ground, but that dim light only made the darkness outside the circle look thicker. No voice came from the trees, no footsteps, no animal sound, just a strange, heavy stillness that did not feel natural. She whispered that maybe it was nothing. Maybe the light was just moon hitting a stone, but the warrior did not agree. Men who lived long in the open did not mistake danger with shadows. The stranger asked if they should run or climb into the trees, but the warrior shook his head. Running blind in the night could lead straight into danger, and climbing left them trapped. He told them to remain quiet and keep the fire small. The woman tightened her arms around the child and prayed silently, wishing the earth would protect them. She thought about her small cabin far away, about how she once feared loneliness more than anything, but now loneliness felt safe compared to what might be watching them. Every second felt like it stretched into long minutes, and every crack in the wood sounded like footsteps. Her heart hurt from holding the fear inside, but she refused to cry, not when the baby needed her strength. The warrior slowly moved around the campsite, checking the ground like someone reading words written in sand. He saw fresh tracks he had not noticed when they first arrived. Tracks that came from the direction of the canyon and led straight toward the cottonwoods where they now rested. They were not wolf tracks, nor deer, nor mountain cat. They were human. 3 or 4 sets, heavy and deep, like men who carried gear or weapons. He returned to the fire and gave them a look that said this danger was not imagined. He whispered that it was possible the wagon was not attacked by chance or by wild animals, but by a group searching for valuables, a child, or revenge. The stranger swallowed hard, and his eyes lowered to the ground as if he already knew more than he told. The warrior asked him again if he saw the wagon, this time with a voice that carried warning instead of question. The man hesitated, then confessed that he had seen the wagon days ago, but lied because he feared being blamed. His voice shook as he explained that he rode past the wagon, heard voices calling for help, but he did not stop because he was scared of being shot or robbed. He said he regretted it every day since, and that he only survived because he hid in the rocks when he heard gunshots. The woman felt anger rise inside her, but it mixed with sadness, because fear could turn even normal men into cowards. The warrior did not judge him, yet the truth changed the silence around them. Now they knew the attackers were real, were armed, and possibly still near. The baby whimpered again, sensing the tension. She rubbed its tiny back and hummed softly. The stranger whispered that if those men found them, they would not leave witnesses, because stolen goods were never worth the risk of someone telling a sheriff. The woman looked down at the sleeping child and imagined strangers snatching it away like stolen treasure. She felt something new spark inside her, not born from fear, but from instinct. She was not the same broken mother from earlier. Holding this child had turned her heart in another direction. She told the warrior she was willing to fight or run or hide, but she would not let anyone take the baby. The warrior studied her face and nodded with quiet approval. He said that at first light, they would move toward his homeland beyond the hills, where the enemies would think twice before following. But before dawn, they must survive the night. He asked the stranger if he could use a weapon if needed, and the man nodded, though his hands shook. The warrior handed him a sharpened wooden spear and warned him not to turn from fear if danger came. The man promised he would not run again. She watched them and wondered how fate placed 3 broken souls together, and then demanded they become strong in one night. Hours crawled by. The warrior stayed awake, listening and observing, sometimes closing his eyes just long enough to hear through silence rather than sight. The stranger dozed and woke repeatedly, like a man afraid sleep might carry him somewhere he could not return from. She did not sleep at all, afraid the baby might cry at the wrong moment. The fire burned down to quiet, glowing coals, giving just enough warmth to keep the cold from settling into their bones. Near what must have been the deepest part of night, A sudden snap of wood echoed from the darkness, sharper than before. The warrior straightened instantly and signaled them to stay behind the trees. This time the sound did not fade. Crunching steps moved through the brush, slow and steady. Voices followed, faint but real, like men whispering directions or arguing softly. The warrior whispered that there were more than two. The woman's heart pounded so hard it hurt. She did not want to lose another child, not even one that life placed in her arms by chance. She kissed the baby's forehead and whispered a promise that everything would be all right, though she did not know how. The stranger leaned near her and said that if he died tonight, at least he wanted to die trying to do something right for once. Tears filled her eyes, but they did not fall. The bushes parted slightly, and shadows moved closer. The warrior pressed a finger to his lips, telling them not to breathe loudly. Two dark outlines appeared between the trees for a moment, then faded back like figures scouting the land before attacking. They were checking trails, tracking footprints. The warrior whispered that they must leave quietly, not wait for dawn. He pointed toward a narrow path through the trees that led toward rocky ground where footprints were harder to track. The woman wrapped the child securely and grabbed her small bundle, ready to move. The stranger followed, holding the spear tightly. They slipped into the darkness, stepping carefully to avoid snapping branches. The warrior moved ahead, guiding them like someone who knew the land by memory. Each step felt risky, but staying meant certain danger. The warrior paused often to listen and to cover their tracks with sand or brush. They reached a slope of hard stone that curved between two cliffs. He explained that noise would echo here, but footprints would disappear. They moved in single line, with the woman in the middle for protection. Halfway through the rocky pass, a sudden shout rose behind them. The men had discovered their empty camp. Angry voices filled the air, calling out threats. A torch flame appeared near the trees, then another. The woman froze, clutching the baby so tightly it whimpered. The warrior whispered for them to keep moving faster, but without panic. The stranger helped her climb a steep ridge, pushing her from behind when her legs shook. The warrior reached the top first and pulled them up one by one. Now they stood on a high ledge where the moonlight spilled across the land, revealing the long stretch of desert beyond. The problem was, they could not outrun armed riders if the men found horses. The warrior looked across the desert with narrowed eyes, thinking fast. He pointed toward a hidden canyon entrance far away, nearly invisible in the night, except to someone who knew it existed. He said if they reached that path, they could disappear before sunrise. But to get there, they had to descend the ridge and cross an open flat space with no cover. Every instinct told them it was risky, but staying on the rocks meant the enemy could corner them. They began moving again, their steps faster this time. The baby stirred but did not cry. The woman whispered thanks, feeling as if some quiet blessing stayed with them. The warrior stopped one last time to scatter loose stones behind them, hoping the noise would mislead anyone following. As they reached the edge of the ridge, a loud echo rang out behind them, and a sharp voice yelled that tracks were found. The woman felt her knees weaken with fear. The stranger cursed under his breath. The warrior said no more hiding was possible now. They had to run. The woman tightened her arms around the baby and took a deep breath. She looked at the warrior, waiting for his signal. He nodded once, then turned his eyes toward the open land ahead, where their fate would be decided. The woman tightened her grip on the baby and gave a small nod back to the warrior as he signaled. The moment they needed to move, the stranger adjusted the spear in his hand, his breathing fast but steady. They ran down the ridge together, feet sliding on loose stone, trying to keep balance without slowing down. The night air stung their faces, and the cold wind felt sharper when fear pushed them forward. Behind them, shouts grew louder, and a torchlit glow danced over the rocks like hunting eyes. The warrior looked back only once, then guided them toward the flat land where the desert stretched like an endless blanket. The woman prayed with every step that the baby stayed quiet. And safe in her arms, they reached the flat ground and crossed it as fast as they could. The moon shined just enough to reveal the faint shape of the hidden canyon far ahead. The warrior whispered that once inside that canyon, they could move quietly through narrow walls until sunrise. The open land made them easy to spot if anyone looked down from the ridge, but they had no other choice. The stranger stayed close behind the woman, ready to protect her if anything changed. His fear was still there, but something stronger guided him now. He seemed determined to prove he would not run again. Halfway across the open land, a sudden sound cracked through the air. The attackers were now at the ridge, their voices louder, searching both directions. The warrior motioned for everyone to keep going and not look back. The woman did as told, though her heart almost broke from worry. She whispered soft words to the baby to keep it calm, telling it that everything would be all right, that she would never leave it, and that its life mattered. As they neared the canyon entrance, the warrior slowed and helped them carefully squeeze through a narrow cut of rock. Inside the canyon, the world changed. Wind noises softened, the air felt cooler, and the space closed around them like protective arms. They continued deeper where torches could not be seen from outside. The warrior started covering their trail with loose sand and small stones, using skills he learned from years in the wild. The stranger helped as best as he could, dragging a dry branch behind him to erase prints. The woman kept walking but looked back often, afraid danger would slip through the cracks. The baby finally fell asleep again, and she felt some hope return. Like a warm spark after a long night of cold wind, they moved for almost an hour until they reached a small cave-like opening that the warrior used before as shelter during storms. Inside, it felt hidden enough to rest until daylight. The woman sank to her knees, holding the baby close, feeling her legs tremble from exhaustion. The stranger sat down slowly, his face pale, but relieved that they were no longer running. The warrior looked outside one last time, making sure no shadows followed them, then sat near the entrance in watchful silence. No one spoke for a while. They listened to their own breathing, grateful that they were alive and together, as dawn began to show light across the canyon walls. The warrior finally told them it was safe to speak. The woman thanked him with tears building in her eyes, saying she never imagined someone would risk his own life for her and a child that was not his. He shook his head gently and told her that life was not about blood alone, but about what the land asked people to protect. The stranger looked down at his hands and admitted his mistake from when he left the wagon behind. He confessed he did not know how to live with guilt until he saw a second chance to do something right. The woman forgave him, saying, fear had taken many lives in the West, but choosing courage even once had power too. When the sun finally rose high enough to warm the canyon, they continued walking toward the warrior's homeland. The trail was peaceful now, and small birds chirped from above the canyon walls. The woman felt like the land was changing from danger to promise with each step. She asked the warrior what would happen when they reached his camp, whether his people would accept her and the baby. He told her that his family respected life, and though not everyone trusted outsiders, kindness would find a place for her in time if she showed her true heart. He also said that the child might hold answers they did not yet know, but answers could be found together, not alone. When they reached the valley, she saw a place more beautiful than she imagined. Trees lined the stream, and the grass shined under the morning sun. Children played near the water, and women worked with baskets full of corn and herbs. Smoke rose gently from cooking fires, and the air smelled like earth, river, and hope. People stopped and stared at them, wondering who they were and why they came. The warrior raised his hand, signaling peace, and spoke to an elder woman who came forward. After a long talk, the elder approached the woman and touched the baby's cheek with a careful smile. She told her she saw love and strength, and said they would help her heal. She cried, not from sorrow this time, but from a mix of relief, gratitude, and the feeling of belonging. The stranger also received help for his wounds, and was told he could stay if he promised to live with respect. He nodded and thanked them deeply. Days passed, and she slowly gained strength again. She visited the warriors' people around their fires, learned their ways, and shared her skills. The baby grew stronger too, and its eyes stayed bright. The warrior often brought food and herbs for the child, checking on them with quiet care. Over time, something warm rose between them. Not rushed, not demanded, but something that felt like a new beginning rising from loss. One evening, she stood on a small hill, holding the baby while looking toward the sunset. The warrior joined her with silent steps. She told him she once believed her heart had ended beside a grave. But now she understood that life sometimes grew from broken ground, like new grass that rises after fire. He told her that the land chose people for each other at the right moment, even when they did not understand why. The stranger, now part of the camp, helped raise shelters and carry firewood, trying every day to repay what life had given back. He often played with the child, laughing in ways he never did before. The woman slowly grew confident again. Each morning she woke with faith that the baby was safe and loved. Seasons changed, and peace rested over the valley. The woman no longer saw herself as someone who lost everything, but someone who survived, loved, and protected. The baby learned to walk on grass, warmed by sunlight, always with the warrior close by, ready to lift the child high into the air. The woman watched with a full heart, feeling that destiny had not taken her life away, but rewritten it in a place where old wounds could turn into new roots. She smiled softly, knowing she was not alone anymore. She had a new purpose, a new home, and a child who was meant to be loved. And every sunset reminded her that endings could become beginnings, even in the hardest lands of the old American frontier.